Today we're talking transfer slots again, and I'm going to tell you the reason why I tell you never to square the transfer slots on an Edelbrock carburetor. Let's get into it. These are three different carburetors, three different applications. This one came off the GMC truck. The VRS carburetor is currently on there now, so it's just the way it came off there. This 650 AVS2 came off of another project vehicle. It's a 383 cubic inch engine, but it's in a a 4-wheel drive truck. So pretty close to the same. I think that engine makes a little bit more torque than mine does. Mine's around 410, and I think that one makes about 440, 450. It's a pretty aggressive engine to be in that 383 to be in that 4-wheel drive truck. But we'll take a look at the transfer slots on that one. And that 500 CFM carburetor came off of a 289 small block Ford with a very mild cam in it. So we'll take a look and see that. The reason why I have these out here is I want to show you what that looks like after it's adjusted. So we'll talk about that here in a quick second, of the reason why I tell you not to square up those transfer slots. Before we get to the Performer series and that AVS2 style or AVS style carburetor, I want to talk briefly about the Edelbrock VRS and the Holley 4150, the Demon carburetor. All of that style of 4150 carburetor is completely different. Now on that style carburetor, I'll always start with a squared off transfer slot as I begin the tuning. Reason being is that type of carburetor really loves to have the fuel already flowing through the transfer slot as you're tuning, to help eliminate that really ugly hesitation that occurs on these engines or that type of carburetor when you're transitioning from idle to more aggressive throttle. Wide open throttle, part throttle, they tend to hesitate and give you a little bit of a stutter, hesitation, bog, whatever you want to call it. And so squaring up the transfer slot and having the fuel already starting to flow through there is a big deal on that style of carburetor. So just want to make that very clear. We're only talking about that style carburetor, not a 4150 style, where running those or keeping those transfer slots slightly opened is always a good thing. Now, also too, this really depends on the type of camshaft you're running. This engine has a fairly mild, but a little bit more aggressive than a mild cam in it. It's not too bad. I'll leave the specs of it again on the screen. I keep forgetting what they are. It's not bad. It's got a really wide LSA. The engine RPMs very well, but it's certainly much different than if this had a much more aggressive profile in it, like we're going to throw in the Chevelle. The more aggressive the profile, the harder that is to do. You're going to have more transfer slot exposed. You're going to have to open up the secondaries quite a bit, or on this style carburetor with the auxiliary air bleeds, to get more air in at idle anyway. And having the transfer slots on more aggressive cam profiles is certainly almost a necessity. You're going to have to do that to be able to deliver enough fuel to get the engine into the RPM range or getting into the power range and not having those big hesitations and bogs. The other side of that for sure is drivability and tuning. Now, every engine is different. There is no universal set of parameters to follow for idle mixture, for RPM at idle, throttle position. All that's dictated by the engine and how it's set up, how it's configured, and how heavy the vehicle is, transmission type. All of those things are very, very critical when you're doing that basic initial adjustment on a carburetor to start to, meter the fuel through the system properly. So I'd love to give you some really basic answer all your questions and give you a really definitive, this is always where you need to start on any carburetor. It's really impossible. And I know people get frustrated with some of the responses that I give when they ask questions on these videos. And I'd love to be able to give you a yes, this is always where you start. But really, those things are very, very difficult to do. Again, because the engine dictates that, and sometimes it's very difficult to do it. That's why when you ask questions on, hey, what should I do with this situation? I always end up asking a lot of questions because I need to know way more about it than just cubic inches and what intake manifold you're running and what do you do from there. So it's always a challenge when answering these tech questions online, but hopefully I'm able to give you a little bit good direction to kind of go in and get you at least pointed in the right direction. So let's go in back on the bench. Let's talk about the AVS2 carburetors that are on there, and we'll talk about how to set up transfer slot initially and the reason why I tell you never to square them off. Let's take a look at these three examples because they're off three different engines, and I think it give you a good idea to see what that transfer slot looks like when it's all said and done and set. So let's first take a look at this 650. AVS2 came off the GMC. We've done a ton of tuning videos, done a ton of videos with this on there. So we know where it idles at around 850, 800 in park. And then, in drive, it's around 600, 650, somewhere in there. It's tuned very well for that application. And if we look at the transfer slots, we can kind of see where they're at. Now, they're open, they're exposed. This is with the making sure that the fast idle cam is completely kicked off, so it's completely the way it looks like with the choke completely disengaged and off fast idle, nothing else showing. So just wanted you to see what that looks like. So let's take a look now at the electric choke 650 that came off the 383 truck. Looks a little bit different. Now we can measure that to show you exactly what that measurement is, but visibly you should be able to kind of see what that looks like to see how far or how little exposed it are. Now, last carburetor, let's take a look at the 500 that came off the 289, and it looks quite a bit different. Transfer slots aren't near as exposed on this one. I do believe on that carburetor, may be a little off on that, but it may have been adjusted or tweaked a little bit, but that carburetor has not been disassembled. But again, choke completely open, completely off the fast idle cam, so you can see what it looks like. Now, meat of the discussion here, why do I tell you not to square up the transfer slots and worry about that? Because really what that does on this carburetor is it leads too many people to be hyper focused on that. If they square up the transfer slots, they start to do some tuning, they start to do some adjustment on the idle mixture, idle speed, get it where they think it's dialed in, go drive it. Does okay, but maybe there's a slight hesitation. They take the carburetor off and they go, oh my God, the transfer slots aren't exposed enough. I'll set that and then I'll put it back on. I'll go through the adjustment again. The hesitation is still there, and they come right back to it and go, oh man, there's a big problem here. I can't get the transfer slots right. The problem what you're doing is you're not making the adjustments that the engine wants. You're hyper fixated on something that has a lot of significance, but it's holding you back from making the correct adjustment. The reason why I made this video is because I've had that question a number of times where someone is just so fixated on the transfer slot. If you set that idle speed correctly, if you set the idle mixtures correctly, and you're off full choke and you're completely open on the choke, don't worry about what the transfer slot looks like. It will correct itself. It will be self-adjusting. It will self-move itself to where it wants to. When you start making the tuning adjustments on there, that's where all the other things come into play. The secondary door adjustment on the AVS2 is super, super critical, and one where I don't think people spend near enough time. We've talked about step-up springs ad nauseum. We've beat that topic to death, it seems like, talked about that quite a bit. That is a big adjustment point where to open up that secondary fueling a little bit quicker. Those two adjustments are super, super critical. Now, what if you've got a Performer Series carburetor that doesn't have that secondary air door adjustment? It's fixed because you have the weighted air valve in there. Quite a bit different. It doesn't require any adjusting on the secondary side, and the step-up spring is where you're going to make most of your adjustments. Ignition timing is hyper critical in this situation. Again, you've heard me beat that dead horse over and over and over again. It's one of the first responses that I have to people that say, hey, I've got an issue with a carburetor, can't figure it out. Almost universally, my first question is, what's your initial timing set at? And almost 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10, yeah, timing's good, but I still am doing this, that, and the other. Give me a number. Tell me the number. What is your initial timing? If it's set at 6 degrees before top dead center, 8 degrees, even 10 is generally too little timing with today's fuel, no matter what fuel you're running. If you're running a E10, 10% ethanol, or even if you're running non-ethanol fuel and you're running a completely 0% ethanol fuel, adding more timing is almost always the thing that cures most of the situations that we have with that. So don't get hyper fixated on transfer slot. Let that work itself out with idle mixture, with setting idle speed. Don't worry about that. The carburetor is going to find that sweet spot. Don't worry about them being squared. Don't even worry about them being squared on that 4150 style or 4160 on a vacuum secondaries carburetor. Is it important? Yes. The carburetor will tell you where it wants to be. Don't get so hung up around it that you're hyper fixated on it and you're worrying that, well, not enough transfer slot exposed. That's the reason why I'm getting the hesitation. On this style of carburetor, probably not. It is probably cured a lot with timing and a lot with the other adjustments that are on there, with step-up springs, with the AVS two-door adjustment, adjusting fueling on the accelerator pump. Those are all things that make a huge difference in there, and I don't want you to get hyper fixated on it. So that's the reason why I made this video, is I don't want you to be so stuck around that. Now again, on a 4150 style or 4160 style carburetor, yes, it does make a big difference. Getting a little bit more fueling started through the transfer slot on that style of carburetor is super critical. They like a lot of fuel. They like a lot of fuel coming through the transfer slot early at idle, and that's what you need to worry about there. On these types of carburetors, they're very efficient. They do a very good job, and they're generally not put on an engine that's got a big, heavy, lopey camshaft. If you've got that type of camshaft on here, then you're going to need to have more transfer slot exposed. That's going to naturally happen when you set the idle speed and idle mixture and let it fall where it falls. Don't worry about that adjustment. Get that way too many times. I think that's the big key to take away here is I don't set these by transfer slot and then bolt it on and go. Now, here's one small caveat to that. If you're braking in the engine initially and you need to set this carburetor so it fires off very quickly, then yes, you can go ahead and do that. But all you're doing is you're opening up the idle speed, and that's all you're really doing. You're just getting that to where the engine fires off immediately and you don't need to worry about it. But again, that's not a transfer slot adjustment. That's just setting the idle speed so you can get that thing fired and getting the break-in done immediately. The last tidbit of information is the same things we talked about before. Timing is a big one, but fuel system is the other side of it. If you've got an engine that's already broken in, you're not trying to do that initial break-in on a flat tappet engine or even on a hydraulic roller engine, and still do a little bit of a break-in period on that. We'll talk about that on a separate video. But fuel system, again, is the key. Make sure you've got good filters in there. Don't run just one filter. I always run 2 filters. We've talked about that quite a bit. 100 micron either right after the tank, before the pump. After the pump, you can run a 10 or a 40 micron on a carbureted system. I tend to run a 40 more often than not. The GMC truck has a 10 micron filter on there now, but we're doing a little bit of testing there to see how much that Russell fuel filter is collecting material. So we'll do a weigh test on that here pretty soon, because we're coming up on almost 2,000 miles on that truck with that fuel filter on there. Initially we want to do 1,000, but it's a brand new tank, brand new system. Figured we'll just catch what we catch out of there. I refer back to this cutaway that we did of the carburetor. I did a video on this maybe 4 years ago now. Maybe it was a little longer than that, where we milled this front of the carburetor down so you could see some more of the pathway here. But we stopped at the transfer slots because I want you to see just how big those are. Idle mixture screws here, transfer slots, slot for the manifold vacuum, but just showed you a nice pathway. But I always like to show that because it's a good representation of where that is in the system, and just what those slots are. They're massive. There's a lot of fuel coming through there. If you look at that idle mixture, it's just a dribble, a tiny amount of fuel, because you're obstructing that with the mixture screw in there as well too. But that transfer slot is a big opening of fuel because it's designed to transfer, from that idle mixture that you're getting through part throttle into more of an open throttling systems, to where the main metering system kicks in and fueling starts to come through the booster. But transfer slot's a big one as far as what its job is, but I don't want you to worry about it so much. I hope that answered most of your questions. If it didn't, leave them in the comments down below. I'm happy to help you. Just remember, always provide a lot of details. I don't know anything about your build, and any information you give me besides cubic inches, compression ratio, what type of intake manifold, cam profile, at least if you don't know the profile or you can't give it to me, at least tell me where it's rated at, whether it's from, off idle to 5,000 RPM or 1,500 to 5,800, whatever that case may be. LSA on the cam's always a good one. Always give as much detail as you can, because it'll help me kind of point you in the right path, or some things to look at quickly. But don't worry about transfer slots. They'll take care of themselves. I know that's a big internet deal. I know people talk about it all the time when it comes to Hollies, and that question gets asked very frequently on the Edelbrock carburetor, or where it needs to be. My response to that is, don't worry about it. It'll sort itself out. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. Be happy to help you. And yeah, hopefully this helps you get things rolling. Anyway, we'll catch you guys on the next one. We'll see you.